Now we're going to load our table into p5.js or into processing. So the way we do that is it's actually really simple. So I'm just going to go into my Finder and find my data set, which is there. So that's the data set that I exported as CSV with you guys just now. And I'm just going to drag it into the white space. And you'll see as confirmation, you'll see in the console that it says one file added to the sketch. How you access the sketch folder for this particular thing. So what a sketch folder is it would hold your HTML file and CSS and data and stuff like that all packaged into one thing. And how I'm going to access it is just Command K or Control K, and I can see all of it here. And where my data set sits is inside this folder where it says data, and that's where it is. And so that was Control K or Command K. And so I'm going to close this, and we're actually going to be using preload to load our tables. So the same with loading images or text fonts in Module 2. I'm going to link that video above if you need a refresh, but it's basically the same mechanism. So firstly, I'm going to type in function preload, open close parentheses, and open and close curly brackets. I'm going to give my table a variable to hold it, and so to define it within the sketch, so I'll say let table. I'm going to name it table to keep it simple, and then in function preload, I'm going to type in table equals load table, open parentheses, and then I'm going to need the file name, so flowers data.csv, close quotation marks, in quotation marks, comma, and then I'm going to need the file format, which is a CSV, so again in quotation marks, comma, and finally I'm going to type in header because our data has headers, and so we want it to register that as well. So we've dropped our file into the sketch, we've named it, we've given it a variable, and then we've commanded it to load that to basically have the two meet each other, right? So how can we test if the table is working properly? What we are going to be using a lot is console.log. So console.log, as a refresher, is basically you commanding p5.js to write information into your console. So we're going to be testing the table using console.log in the setup function, just so it doesn't keep writing over itself repeatedly. So let's try seeing what's in our entire table as an array first. To do that, I'm going to give it a variable, just say let test. And then in setup, I'm going to say test equals table.getArray with capital A, open close parentheses, and then close with a semicolon. And then I'm going to console.log test, so test written inside my parentheses, and then close that with a semicolon. And so if I run that, and it's going to open in my browser window. Oh, one thing that I forgot to show you guys is you need the data slash. You need to type in data slash before your file name in this case, just because, so if we go back to that sketch folder, just because your file sits within the data folder, so it's kind of like breadcrumbs like this, you also need to let p5.js know like where to locate it, and so that's why we add data slash in front of the file name, so don't forget that. So I forgot to do that. So now it should work. So if I run this, okay, so it's our background, and if I open the console using developer tools, and so how you do that in Chrome is you just go basically more tools, developer tools, or I usually just use this shortcut, but developer tools, and then you can see that we have an array in our console. If I open that, it shows my entire table's information. So my colors, my names, month, year, and all of that is now stored as an array. And so this is what an array looks like. Which is great, which means that it's accessed properly and it works. If you'd like to understand what an array is, Daniel Schiffman from the Coding Train has a great video explaining what strings and arrays are, and I'll link that above. So it's going to be similar steps for testing your data set in p5.js basically. Is firstly, you give it a variable. Second, you fill the variable with, so you define the variable with a table command. And then third, you're going to place that variable into a console.log so that you're able to read it on the console and make sure that p5.js has the right information. Yeah, so let's move on. Next, we're going to try getting the count of rows. So we're going to see if p5 can count how many rows our table has. So same steps. One, introduce my variable. I'm going to name it total rows. Second, I'm going to give it a table, like the command to count it. And so in this case, it's total rows is table.getRowCount. And don't forget to capitalize the other words first letters. And then I'm going to console.log total rows. I'm going to save that. And all I need to do is actually just refresh this. And what that's going to give me is, now it's giving me a number. So it's giving me 102. So now we know that, so now P5.js knows, okay, you have 102 rows in your table. And you can see more of these, all of these commands in P5 table reference. There's a bunch that you can, there's a bunch of information that you can retrieve from your table if you ever want to play around with more commands, but they are all there. And if you click on one of them, so for example, the one that we saw was get row count. So if you click on one of them, it'll tell you basically what you need to type in. In this case, you don't need to type in anything. It's just get row count, like that. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Finally, we're going to also test trying to get one of the data points in our table. So if we look at our table, and I'm going to console.log test again, but basically we've got like, you know, this array, right? And we've got like all these data points. We have white here, and then 2018 there, and then Snapdragon here, right? So I'm going to try like extracting just one of them and see how P5.js can do that. How we can extract this text is by using the table.getString method, which is one that I use most often. And so same steps, once again, give it a variable. I'm going to say name, because it's a flower name. And then in setup, I'm going to say name equals table.getString. And then what I need to type in my parentheses this time is where it is sitting, in which row and in which column it's sitting. So I'll type it in first. I'll say I want something from row 1 in column flower, like that. And so because our columns are identified by headers, I can just say that. And then I'm going to console.log the name of that flower. And so if I run this, and now it's given me my flower name. And so you can play around with like getting other rows. So if I want something from like row 15, what does that tell me? And it's going to tell me a different name. So yeah, so table.getString, once again, is in here. There we go, so getString. And it basically retrieves a string value from a table specified row and column. A string is essentially other word for like a text. It's just called a string because it's like a string of characters. So what you need in the brackets is, yeah, the row ID and the column. And another alternative to getString, so this is of course for like more like text information, but if you have, for example, more numerical information, then you can use something similar called getNum here. So it's essentially the same thing, but instead of retrieving a string value, it will retrieve like something as numeric value. And I'm going to say, just to demonstrate it to you guys, I'm going to same steps. 1, my variable. 2, my variable introduced with a command, so getNum. And I'm going to say 1 month, because this time I want to extract something from the month column. And then I'm just going to say row 1 as an example, and then I'm going to console.log month. And so I've saved that, and if I refresh this, and now we have 8 as a number, so it's an actual mathematical number that it's registering into the console. So that's useful for if you have like calculations and stuff like that embedded in your data.